Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku created a quirk that could reprogram reality. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The wind on the rooftop was a liar. It whispered of freedom, of open skies and boundless possibility, a cruel counterpoint to the cage of words that had just been locked around Izuku Midoriya's heart. The air still tasted of ozone and a faint, electric tang of power, the lingering ghost of All Might's departure. The hero had left in a single, deafening leap, a thunderclap of motion that rattled the rooftop access door and Izuku's very bones. He was gone, and he had taken the sun with him. Izuku's knees gave out. He didn't fall so much as fold, his lanky frame collapsing onto the gritty concrete with a soft thud. The rough surface scraped against his palms, but he barely felt it. All feeling was centered in his chest, a hollow, aching cavern where his dream had lived for 15 years. It's not bad to dream. But you have to be realistic, kid. The words, spoken with a pained, weary sort of kindness that was somehow worse than outright scorn, echoed in the cavern. They bounced off the walls of his skull, each reverberation a fresh crack in his already shattered spirit. All Might, his hero, his idol, the very symbol of hope in their superpowered world, had looked him in the eye and told him to give up. His fingers, trembling, crept to the pocket of his middle school uniform. They brushed against the scorched, crinkled edges of his notebook. Hero Analysis for the Future, number 13. He had thrust it at All Might with such desperate, idiotic hope, and the hero had signed it. A treasure. An artifact of a god. Now it felt like a tombstone. The bold signature wasn't an autograph, it was a final signature on a death certificate. The death of a dream. Tears, hot and thick, finally broke free. They weren't the loud, messy sobs he was famous for. These were silent, heavy drops that tracked through the grime on his cheeks, each one a testament to a universe of disappointment. He had been told he was useless his entire life. By doctors, by classmates, by Kaken. He'd always endured it, always held on to the flickering candle flame of All Might's debut video. The video where he'd said, with a booming laugh, that anyone could be a hero. It was all a lie. A beautiful, wonderful lie told to the masses. The fine print, apparently, was that you needed a quirk. He pushed himself up, his limbs feeling like lead weights. He shuffled to the railing, the metal cool and unforgiving beneath his white-knuckled grip. The city sprawled below, a breathtaking panorama of glass and steel, a testament to human achievement. Cars moved like corpuscles through concrete arteries. People, tiny and insignificant from this height, went about their lives. Lives filled with purpose, with power, with quirks. For a terrifying, fleeting moment, the whispering wind changed its tune. It no longer spoke of freedom. It suggested a release. A quick, simple solution to the crushing weight of being Izuku Midoriya. It would be so easy. Just one more step. A short flight for a boy who could never truly fly. The thought was as cold and sharp as a shard of glass in his gut. Boom! A distant explosion rocked the air, pulling him back from the brink. A plume of black smoke billowed into the sky a few blocks away. His body reacted before his mind could, a Pavlovian response honed by years of obsessive hero chasing. His head snapped toward the sound, his analyst's brain already calculating distance, probable cause, potential hero response times. Then the hollowness returned, colder than before. It doesn't matter. It's not your business. You can't help. You're not a hero. The words weren't All Might's anymore. They were his own. He turned away from the railing, away from the smoke, away from the life he had so desperately wanted. The walk down the stairs was a descent into a personal hell. Each clanging footstep on the metal stairs was a drumbeat marking the funeral march of his aspirations. By the time he reached the street, the world had lost its color. It wasn't a literal change, but a perceptual one. The vibrant advertisements on digital billboards were just garish noise. The cheerful chatter of the afternoon crowd was a meaningless buzz. He moved through it all like a ghost, his shoulders hunched, his gaze fixed on the cracked pavement in front of him. He was a defective part in a world of perfect machinery. A line of broken code in a flawless program. People were talking, their voices piercing his bubble of misery. Did you see that? All Might showed up. Yeah, he took care of that sludge guy in a second. I heard he had some kid hostage. Hope the kid's okay, the sludge villain. The one who had tried to suffocate him, to wear his skin like a suit. All Might had saved him then, too. Izuku felt a bitter, sour taste in his mouth. He'd been saved, only to be emotionally executed minutes later. Which was worse? To die physically, or to have your entire reason for living snuffed out? He didn't know. He didn't want to think about it. He just wanted to go home, crawl into his All Might-themed bedroom, a monument to his own foolishness, and cease to exist for a while. He turned off the main thoroughfare, onto the quieter residential streets of his neighborhood. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and violet, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to claw at his feet. The air was quieter here. He could hear the hum of cicadas, the distant laughter of children, the normal sounds of a world that didn't care that his own had just ended. He was passing a narrow cross street, his gaze still locked on the ground, when a flash of motion caught the edge of his vision. A small, scruffy calico cat, its fur matted and one ear torn, darted from behind a garbage can. It was skittish, bolting directly into the street. At the same instant, a delivery truck, its driver likely distracted or trying to make up for lost time, rounded the corner. It was moving too fast for this small street. The driver saw the cat, a frantic, wide-eyed expression flashing across his face. He slammed on the horn, a deafening blare that shattered the evening calm. He stomped on the brakes, and the squeal of tortured rubber filled the air. But it wasn't enough. Time seemed to warp, stretching like taffy. Izuku saw it all with horrifying, crystal clarity. The cat, frozen in a posture of pure terror. The massive grille of the truck, a chrome juggernaut of death, bearing down on it. The physics of the situation were absolute, the conclusion foregone. There was not enough distance. There was not enough time. The cat was going to die, and something inside Izuku Midoriya, the part of him that was not logical, not realistic, not broken, the stubborn, heroic core that had survived 15 years of scorn and one final, devastating rejection, screamed. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't a thought articulated in words. It was a singular, primal command that erupted from the very bedrock of his being, a desperate, silent roar that consumed every iota of his will. It was the same instinct that had sent his useless legs running toward the sludge villain to save Kaken. It was the pure, unadulterated desire to save. Stop! The world broke. For one heart-stopping, incomprehensible second, reality dissolved. The warm colors of the sunset vanished, replaced by a stark, absolute monochrome. The vibrant, living world was stripped bare, reduced to a wireframe model of itself. And over everything, a shimmering, translucent cascade of text began to flow. It was code. Intricate, complex, and utterly alien, yet somehow he could read it. It scrolled past his vision in iridescent greens, blues, and golds, defining the very existence of the objects around him. He saw the asphalt of the road, and beside it, a floating block of text, surface_object, ID, asphalt_7b4, properties, friction_coefficient equals 0.75, temperature equals 301.15 K, structural_integrity equals 0.92. He saw the lamppost on the corner, object_light_source, ID, street lamp_C3, status, inactive, power_source, municipal_grid, bulb_type, LED. His gaze snapped to the truck. It was the most complex thing he'd ever seen. A million lines of interconnected code swirled around it, defining its mass, its velocity, its momentum, its engine's combustion cycle, the very state of every nut and bolt. Vehicle_object, ID, delivery truck_F81, mass_kg, 5443.11, vector 3_velocity, 17.88, 0.0, 0.0, physics_engine, havoc_custom_v8.4, driver_input, brake_pressure equals 1.0, steering_angle equals -2.3, collision_imminent, true. The world wasn't just muted, it was silent. The blaring horn was a distorted, digital screech that tapered off into a low, pervasive hum, like a universe-sized server room waking up. In this frozen, coded moment, his will, that desperate command to stop, became a cursor. A blinking, white line that targeted the truck's fundamental properties. It wasn't a conscious act. He didn't know how he was doing it. He just knew what needed to happen. The truck didn't just stop. It glitched. It lurched forward a few feet, its wireframe model stuttering as if caught in a massive lag spike. Then it jerked backward, seemingly reversing time for a fraction of a second, its code flashing a violent red error, paradox _detected. Then, with a final, jarring shudder that seemed to shake the very fabric of the world, it froze. It stopped dead. 1 inch from the calico cat's nose. Not a slow, screeching halt. Not a slide. A full, instantaneous cessation of all momentum, defying every law of physics Izuku had ever learned. The tires, which should have been smoking and melted, were pristine. The cargo in the back, which should have slammed into the front of the container, was silent. The driver was thrown forward against his seatbelt, but the truck itself was a statue. Then, as quickly as it had vanished, reality crashed back in. Color, sound, and sensation flooded his senses in a tidal wave. The blare of the horn resumed for a split second before the driver let go. The smell of hot metal and ozone, inexplicably strong, filled his nostrils. The world tilted violently, and a pain of exquisite, blinding intensity erupted behind his eyes. It was a white-hot spike being driven from his forehead straight through to the base of his skull. He gasped, staggering back. A warm, wet trickle ran from his nose. He brought a trembling hand to his face, and his fingers came away stained with crimson. A nosebleed. A vicious one. The truck driver, a portly man in a sweat-stained uniform, was shouting, a stream of panicked curses. What the hell? What in the brakes? They just worked. He unbuckled his seatbelt, stumbling out of the cab and staring at the front of his vehicle, then at the space between his bumper and the cat. The cat, its 9 lives apparently intact, shook itself once and bolted, disappearing into a hedge. The driver looked around, his eyes wild and confused. They scanned past Izuku, who was leaning against a wall, trying to keep his legs from buckling. The man saw nothing out of the ordinary, just a skinny kid with a nosebleed who looked like he'd seen a ghost. He shook his head, muttering about needing a vacation, and got back in his truck, heart still hammering. Izuku didn't wait. He pushed himself off the wall and fled. He ran, his head throbbing with a pain that felt less like an injury and more like a massive system error. He didn't understand what had happened. He couldn't comprehend it. But as he ran, one image was burned into his mind, the world as a stream of text, and his will as the editor. Inko Midoriya was worried. Her son had come home pale, haggard, and with the faint, dried remnants of a nosebleed under his nostrils. He'd mumbled something about the heat and stress from the villain attack earlier, and had shuffled directly to his room, refusing dinner. Alone, Izuku closed his door, the click of the latch sounding unnaturally loud in the silence. He leaned his back against it, his breathing ragged. His room, once his sanctuary, felt alien. The legion of All Might posters and figurines seemed to watch him with accusing eyes. The central, giant poster of the symbol of peace in his prime, smiling that indomitable smile, felt like a mockery. Be realistic. The throbbing in his head had subsided to a dull, persistent ache, like the hum of a faulty fluorescent light. He touched his face. His nose was sore. What was that? What had he done? His analytical mind, the only part of him that had ever felt special, kicked into gear, battling through the fog of pain and confusion. It couldn't have been a hallucination. The truck did stop. The driver's reaction was real. The cat was alive. Therefore, the event was real. The desaturation, the silence, the code, all of it. A quirk? The word was a blasphemy in his mind. A cruel joke. Izuku Midoriya, the quirkless wonder, manifesting a power at 15? It was unheard of. Quirks manifested by age 4, maybe 5 at the latest. It was a biological fact. Unless the sheer, overwhelming force of his despair, his desperation, and his heroic will had somehow broken the rules. Not just the rules of traffic safety, but the rules of biology. Had he, on the worst day of his life, willed a quirk into existence? A tremor of something he hadn't felt in hours. Hope ran through him. It was a terrifying, fragile thing, a green shoot pushing its way through cracked and barren earth. But he had to be sure. He had to test it. His eyes scanned his room, a laboratory of teenage obsession. They landed on a simple object, a mechanical pencil, resting on his cluttered desk. It was small. Harmless. If he was wrong, if it was all a delusion, then nothing would happen. He sat at his desk, his heart hammering against his ribs. He stared at the pencil, a cheap yellow plastic cylinder. He tried to recapture the feeling. The desperate, world-ending need for something to happen. He squeezed his eyes shut and focused on the pencil, pouring all his concentration into a single, mental command. Float. Nothing. The pencil remained stubbornly inert, obeying the mundane laws of gravity. Frustration warred with a fresh wave of despair. Of course. It was a fluke. A stress-induced psychotic break. He was just broken, not special. He slumped in his chair, the hope withering. But then he remembered. He hadn't just wished for the truck to stop. He had seen it. He had seen its code. His perception had changed. He took a deep breath, letting it out slowly. He would try again. Methodically. Like analyzing a hero's quirk. He opened his eyes and focused on the pencil again. This time, he didn't try to command it. He tried to see it. To look past the yellow plastic and graphite, to see its underlying structure. He concentrated, pushing past the ache in his skull, trying to access that strange, monochrome state. For a moment, nothing. Then, a flicker. The edges of the pencil seemed to shimmer. He pushed harder, a low groan escaping his lips. The dull ache in his head sharpened. The world around the pencil began to lose its color, fading to grayscale. And there it was, fainter than before, localized just around the pencil itself. The iridescent text reappeared. Object_writing_implement. ID, pencil_mech_0.7 mm. Material, plastic, metal, graphite. Mass, 0.008 kilograms. Property_list. Gravity_affected, true. He could read it. He understood it. It was like a language he had always known but never spoken. His eyes locked onto one line, gravity_affected, true. This was it. This was the key. He wasn't lifting the pencil with his mind. He was telling the universe that gravity no longer applied to it. He took another shaky breath. His will, a trembling cursor, moved to the line of code. He focused on the word true. He had to change it. He pictured it in his mind, the letters dissolving and reforming into false. It was an immense mental effort, like trying to lift a car with a single, underdeveloped muscle. His vision swam. The pain in his head intensified. The code flickered, threatening to vanish. Change. The pencil wobbled. It lifted, slowly, unsteadily, an inch off the surface of the desk. It hung there for a bare second, surrounded by a faint, shimmering distortion. It was the most beautiful, miraculous thing he had ever seen. Then the connection snapped. The code vanished. The world rushed back into full color. The pencil clattered back onto the desk. Izuku gasped, slumping forward, his forehead hitting the cool wood of his desk. He was panting, his whole body slick with a cold sweat. He felt dizzy, mentally drained, as if he'd just taken a week-long final exam in the span of 5 seconds. But it had worked. It was real. A delirious, hysterical laugh escaped his lips. It was real. He had a quirk. He pushed himself upright, his mind now racing faster than it ever had before. He needed more data. He grabbed a brand new notebook, one not yet tainted by hero worship, and a pen. At the top of the first page he wrote, "Quirk analysis, subject myself." He needed to know the rules. The limits. The cost. Test 1, object manipulation float. Result partial success. Object lifted 1 inch for 1 second. Cost moderate headache, dizziness, mental exhaustion. Hypothesis, direct manipulation of fundamental physical laws is possible, but extremely draining. He looked around for his next experiment. His eyes landed on his favorite All Might figurine, the Silver Age edition, standing proudly on his shelf. He couldn't risk breaking it. But maybe, a less destructive change. He focused on the figurine. The code manifested more easily this time, as if a neural pathway was being tentatively formed. He found the data block for its paint job. Texture_palette, primary_color, 0000FF // secondary_color, FF0000 / red, trim_color, FFFF / white. He targeted the primary color, the iconic blue of All Might's suit. He tried to rewrite the hexadecimal code, changing it to the green of his own school uniform, 008000. This felt different. It wasn't a physics-defying change. It was cosmetic. The mental strain was less, like editing a single word in a document instead of rewriting a whole paragraph of programming. The blue on the figurine flickered. For a split second, it shimmered with a brilliant, emerald green before snapping back to its original blue. Test 2, Property Alteration Color. Result, Temporary Success. Object color changed for 1 second. Cost, minor headache, slight eye strain. Hypothesis, aesthetic or non-physical changes are less taxing than fundamental physics changes. He was learning. He scribbled notes, furiously, his handwriting messy in his excitement. What else? What about something non-visual? His phone alarm was set for the morning. He could try to affect that. He focused on the device, diving into its code. It was a labyrinth of software and hardware commands. He found the alarm function. Alarm_trigger, time, 7 o'clock, sound_file, classic_chime.mp3, audio_output equals true, vibrate equals true. He targeted the audio_output. With another pulse of concentration, he edited the line to read false. The effort was comparable to the color change. Minimal strain. He checked the phone. The alarm was still set. He wouldn't know if it worked until morning, but he felt confident. One more test. A constructive one. He found a plastic ruler on his desk with a small, hairline crack in it. He focused on the flaw, seeing the break in its code, a line that read structural_integrity equals 0.98. He tried to force the value back to 1.0. This was harder. It felt like he was trying to knit together individual threads of code. He felt a sharp pang in his temples, and the crack visibly sealed over, the plastic becoming whole again. Test 3, Structural Repair. Result, Success. Minor crack in plastic ruler repaired. Cost, moderate headache, feeling of mental friction. Hypothesis, healing or fixing objects is possible, but requires more precise and complex edits than simple changes. He leaned back in his chair, the pen dropping from his numb fingers. The notebook lay open, the first page of a new scripture. The evidence was undeniable. This wasn't telekinesis. It wasn't simple matter manipulation. This was something deeper, something infinitely more complex and powerful. He wasn't just influencing the world. He was accessing and editing its base programming. Its fundamental, underlying rules. He was editing its source code. He stared at the words he had written. Quirk analysis. This was his. Not borrowed, not inherited. Born from his own pain and will. The despair that had hollowed him out on that rooftop began to recede, and in its place, a feeling, fierce and blinding, took root. It was hope, but it was a different kind of hope than the childish worship he'd had for All Might. This was a dangerous, terrifying, powerful hope. The kind of hope that could build worlds, or break them. He could be a hero. With this power, he could do more than just punch villains. He could disarm bombs by deleting their trigger mechanisms. He could stop runaway vehicles without laying a hand on them. He could reinforce a collapsing building structure. He could save people. He could actually, truly save them. But the fear was there, a cold shadow clinging to the edges of his newfound power. The headaches. The nosebleeds. The exhaustion. What was the limit? What would happen if he tried to change something too big? Could he make a mistake? A typo in the code of reality? What kind of cosmic blue screen of death would that cause? The glitch with the truck had felt unstable, like he'd almost torn something. He looked at his reflection in the dark screen of his computer monitor. He saw the same round, freckled face, the same ridiculously fluffy green hair. He still looked like useless, quirkless Deku, but behind his own eyes he could almost see it. A faint, iridescent flicker. The world had told him he couldn't be a hero. All Might, the god of his world, had told him to be realistic. Izuku picked up his pen. His hand was steady now. He looked at the smiling poster of All Might, not with adoration, but with a new, burning resolve. You told me to be realistic, he thought, a strange, feral grin touching his lips for the first time. But you don't get to define my reality anymore. His dream wasn't dead. It had just been rebooted. He would learn this power. He would master it. He would control it. He would rewrite his own story, one line of code at a time. And he would become a hero. The 10 months that followed the glitch on the rooftop were the most intense, secretive, and terrifying of Izuku Midoriya's life. The world outside his bedroom door continued as normal. His mother worried about his newfound reclusiveness. His classmates continued to treat him as a phantom in the hallways. Kaken's explosive taunts became tinged with a new, confused sort of aggression, sensing a change in Deku that he couldn't quantify and therefore hated. But within the sanctuary of his room, and more importantly, within the labyrinth of his own mind, Izuku was undergoing a transformation more profound than any physical training regimen could ever offer. He had retired his hero analysis for the future notebooks. They were artifacts of a different life, relics of a boy who could only observe. His new notebooks, crisp and unmarked, were quickly filled with a script only he could understand. Their covers bore a new title, Source Code, Reality Analysis Application. They were his grimoires, his textbooks, his confessional. The first few weeks were a period of frantic, clumsy exploration. His bedroom became his laboratory. The successful alarm clock test was his first repeatable result. The morning after he'd altered its code, a profound silence had greeted him. His phone screen lit up at 7 a.m. sharp, displaying the alarm notification, but the audio_output equals false command had held. No chime, no vibration. Just a silent, digital scream. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. It was control. He moved on to other small-scale edits, meticulously documenting each attempt. Entry 004 Aesthetic Alteration, Textile Pigmentation. Objective: change the color of my white school shirt to black. Procedure: focused on the shirt, isolated the textile_object and its color_property. The default value was a hex code, FFFFFF. Attempted to overwrite with 0000000. Result: success. The shirt turned a perfect, uniform black for approximately 3.7 seconds before flickering and reverting to white. The mental strain was minimal, equivalent to solving a moderately difficult math problem. Cost: a faint, pulsing sensation behind the right eye. No nosebleed. Hypothesis: temporary cosmetic changes are low cost. The reality engine seems to have a default state it actively tries to revert to. Maintaining a change requires continuous, active concentration, which is likely unsustainable. Entry 007, Structural Repair, Ceramics. Objective: repair a chipped plate from the kitchen. Mom was sad about it. Procedure: isolated the ceramic_object. The chip registered as a structural_integrity value of 0.991 and a volume_discrepancy in its geometric data. This was far more complex than the ruler. I didn't just have to change a value. I had to recompile the object's physical form, pulling molecular data from the surrounding material to fill the gap. It felt like weaving, not typing. Result: success. The chip filled in, the glaze smoothing over perfectly. The plate is now whole. The change appears to be permanent. Cost: sharp, stabbing pain behind the forehead, lasting several minutes. Minor nosebleed, 2 to 3 drops. Feeling of significant mental fatigue, had to lie down for an hour. Hypothesis: permanent changes to physical matter are exponentially more costly than temporary ones. The system doesn't fight this change as actively, as it's now a new default for the object, but the initial commit of the code is taxing. These early days taught him the basics. But as the weeks turned into months, he grew bolder, and his understanding of his quirk, his source code, deepened. He began to understand its 3 fundamental, terrifying limitations. The first was the cost. It was a direct, brutal economy of power. Every edit had a price, paid in neurological and physiological damage. A small, temporary change was a headache. A larger, permanent fix was a migraine and a nosebleed. One afternoon, he tried something more ambitious. He stood at his window, looking at a single, small cloud in the sky. Its code was majestic and terrifying, a chaotic symphony of H2O_vapor_ density, temperature_ gradients, and atmospheric _pressure_ zones. He tried to nudge it, to alter its vector_ velocity by a mere fraction. The backlash was instantaneous and savage. It felt like his brain had been plunged into liquid nitrogen. A phantom screech of error, cascade_failure_imminent, flashed behind his eyes. The world went white with pain, and he collapsed, his head hitting the floor with a dull thud. He woke up an hour later, disoriented, with a splitting headache that lasted for 2 days and a faint memory fog that made it hard to recall simple words. The cloud hadn't moved an inch. Entry 042, Systemic Alteration, Meteorology, Failure. Objective, influence the movement of a small cloud. Result, complete failure. No observable effect. Cost, severe migraine. Unconsciousness for approximately 1 hour. Short-term memory fog. Severe nosebleed. Conclusion, I am not a god. Some systems are too large, too complex, too interconnected. Trying to alter them is like trying to change the course of a river by throwing a single pebble. The system's inertia is too great, and the attempt itself can cause critical damage to the user, me. There are hard limits. I must respect them. The second limitation was the complexity. He couldn't just wish for things to happen. Source code was not magic. It was a programming language. To edit something, he first had to understand it on a fundamental level. He couldn't just make a pencil float. He had to see its gravity_affected equals true property and change it. To fix the plate, he had to understand its molecular structure. This meant his power was limited by his own knowledge. He started devouring physics textbooks, chemistry websites, and engineering manuals with the same fervor he once reserved for hero forums. He was no longer just analyzing quirks. He was trying to decompile the universe. The third, and most insidious, limitation was the risk. He called it the butterfly bug. Reality, he learned, was a spaghetti code nightmare. Everything was interconnected in ways he couldn't possibly predict. A small change could have unforeseen, rippling consequences. The first time it happened was a minor incident. He was trying to speed up his lagging computer by editing its CPU_cycle_ allocation. It worked. His computer felt snappier. But at the same moment, the digital clock on his cable box in the living room reset to midnight. A tiny, harmless bug. A ripple. But what if the ripple wasn't harmless? What if fixing a crack in a building's wall caused a structural failure in a support beam 3 floors up? What if stopping a villain's bullet by deleting it from existence created a vacuum that caused a fatal embolism in a bystander's brain? The possibilities were a source of constant, gnawing anxiety. Every potential use of his power came with a terrifying question: what am I not seeing? His physical training, in comparison, was an afterthought. He did the work, of course. He followed the general fitness plan he downloaded online, the one intended for people prepping for hero courses. He ran until his lungs burned, did push-ups until his arms shook, and dragged discarded appliances at the Dagoba Municipal Beach Park. But he wasn't sculpting his body into a vessel for a borrowed power. He was simply ensuring his hardware could handle the strain his software was putting on it. The mental exhaustion from a major edit was so profound that a weak body would simply fail. He needed to be physically fit not to punch robots, but to survive his own quirk. As the 10-month deadline approached, his strategy for the UA entrance exam solidified. He couldn't go in and start deleting robots. The cost would be astronomical. He'd be unconscious after taking out 1 or 2. The risk was even worse. What paradox would erasing a dozen multi-ton robots from reality create? No, he had to be smarter. He had to be a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. His quirk's true strength in this scenario wasn't in its right function, but in its red function. He would be the ultimate analyst, and for direct intervention, he would only use small, subtle, low-cost edits. He wouldn't be the star of the show. He would be the stage manager, ensuring the play ran smoothly and no one got hurt. He would earn his place, not cheat his way into it. The air at the UA orientation hall crackled with nervous energy, and the low thrum of 100 different quirks. Izuku stood amongst the crowd, a small, unassuming figure in his track suit. He looked just as nervous as everyone else, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. But his nervousness wasn't about failure. It was about control, about not letting his secret, godlike power slip out. Present Mick's booming voice filled the auditorium, explaining the practical exam. Foe villains, robots, with different point values. 1-pointers, 2-pointers, 3-pointers. Izuku listened, but his mind was already at work. He wasn't just hearing the words, he was running simulations. Robots. Manufactured. They'll have standardized parts, predictable programming, designated patrol routes. If I can read the code of one, I can read the code of all of them. Then came the warning about the 0-pointer, the massive arena trap. Your best bet, little listeners, is to run away. The crowd buzzed. Izuku felt a cold knot of anticipation in his stomach. That was the real test. Not the small fry. The obstacle. He found himself at the gates of Battle Center B. The massive, faux cityscape loomed before them. Other examinees were sizing each other up, stretching, activating their quirks in small, flashy displays. There was a boy with engines in his calves, a girl with pink skin, a stoic boy with a bird head. And then there was Kaken, his face a mask of arrogant confidence, sparks dancing in his palms. His eyes scanned the crowd, and for a moment, they landed on Izuku. The usual scorn was there, but it was mixed with a sliver of confusion. Izuku met his gaze for a bare second before looking away, focusing on the gate. Stay calm. Read-only mode first. Analyze, assess, then act. The great doors slid open with a groan. Present Mick's cry of "Gyo!" echoed from the speakers, but Izuku was already moving. He had seen the code. He knew the initial wave of robots was programmed to appear 50 meters inside the gate, in the main square. While everyone else was still processing the start, he was already sprinting down the street. The world flickered into monochrome. The constant, low-level pain of activating source code was a familiar companion now, a dull ache he could push to the back of his mind. The cityscape resolved into a wireframe of green lines, and the air filled with the silent, scrolling text of reality. He saw them immediately. Entity_list. Robot_villain_1P. Location, 50.10, 15.3. Status, active. Patrol_path, P7. Robot_villain_1P. Location, 52.40, -10.1. Status, active. Patrol_path, P7. Robot_villain_2P. Location, 65.80, 0.0. Status, active. Patrol_path, P4. They were glowing vectors on his mental map, their patrol routes highlighted like GPS directions. He was the only one who could see the enemy before they even turned the corner. He darted into an alleyway, his heart pounding. A 2-pointer rumbled past the entrance, its optical sensor swiveling. Izuku held his breath. He waited for it to pass, then peered out. He saw another examinee, a girl with large, expressive eyes and a brown bob, cornered by 2 1-pointers. She touched one, and it floated harmlessly into the air, her quirk clearly gravity-related. But the second one was lining up a shot from its arm-mounted cannon. Izuku's eyes narrowed. No time for a big edit. Be subtle. He focused on the soles of his own running shoes. Object_footwear, ID, running shoe_L, property_list, friction_coefficient, 0.8. With a pulse of will, he temporarily spiked the value. Friction_coefficient, 2.5. The cost was negligible, a mere flicker of pain. He pushed off the wall. His foot didn't just find purchase. It felt like it momentarily bonded with the asphalt. The burst of speed was explosive. He shot across the street in a blur, tackling the girl out of the way just as the robot's rubber bullet splattered against the wall where her head had been. "Whoa!" she yelped, landing in a heap with him. "Thanks!" You're fast, just good running shoes, he mumbled, his face flushing. He scrambled up. That one's floating, this one's right here. You can do it! He didn't wait for a reply. He was already gone, ducking into another alley, his mind's eye already tracking the next cluster of points. He wasn't here to fight. He was here to enable. For the next several minutes, he became a ghost in the machine. He didn't destroy a single robot himself. Instead, he used his read-only function to its fullest. He saw a boy with a quirk that let him harden his skin getting surrounded. Izuku, from a block away, analyzed the approaching robots. He saw a flaw in one of the 2 pointers. A specific armor plate on its left leg had a lower structural integrity value than the others, a manufacturing defect. The left leg! Izuku shouted from the rooftop he'd scrambled onto. Aim for the plate on the left leg! It's weaker! The hardening boy, confused but desperate, slammed his fist into the indicated spot. The armor crumpled with a satisfying crunch, and the robot toppled. The boy looked up, but Izuku was already gone. Villain points 0. Rescue points, climbing. He saw a group of 3 examinees about to be ambushed by a 3-pointer bursting through a wall. The code for the wall flashed a bright red, event, structural_failure_imminent, a full second before it happened. Move! He screamed, not caring who heard him. The wall! They scattered just as the 3-pointer smashed through, showering the spot where they'd been standing with concrete and rebar. Rescue points, climbing higher. His most complex support action came midway through the exam. A powerful blast from another examinee, probably Kaken, judging by the sheer explosive force, had destabilized the building. A huge chunk of the facade, a concrete slab the size of a car, was peeling away from the 3rd story, ready to fall right on top of a boy with a lightning quirk who was too busy dispatching a robot to notice. Izuku saw the object_debris in his coded vision. He saw its mass, its vector, and its structural integrity equals 0.2. It was going to shatter on impact, sending deadly shrapnel everywhere. He couldn't stop it. The cost would floor him. He couldn't change its vector. That was physics-defying. But maybe, he poured his concentration into the falling slab, ignoring the growing throb in his skull. He found the code governing its internal cohesion. Property_list. Molecular_bonds, weak, reinforce_internal_bonds, 0.2. He didn't try to stop it. He did the opposite. He reinforced it. He shoved his will into that value, pushing it to its absolute maximum. Reinforce_internal_bonds, 1.0. The world stuttered for a microsecond. A hot trickle of blood ran from his left nostril. The falling slab of concrete, instead of crumbling, held its shape. It slammed into the ground next to the lightning boy with a deafening crack, but it remained in one piece. It dented the street, but it didn't explode into a cloud of death. The boy jumped back, startled but unharmed, before turning back to his fight. Izuku leaned against the wall, wiping the blood away with the back of his hand, panting. That was a bigger edit. That one cost him. But the boy was safe. His own score was a flat 0. He hadn't destroyed a single robot. A spike of pure, canonical panic shot through him. What if this was the wrong strategy? What if rescue points were just a tiebreaker? What if he was just a quirkless failure with a weird headache-inducing delusion? Before he could spiral, the ground began to shake. It wasn't a tremor, it was a rhythmic, earth-shattering stomp. A shadow fell over the entire street, a moving eclipse that blotted out the sun. The other examinees stopped fighting. The chaos of the exam floor died down into a terrified hush. From around a corner of skyscraper-sized buildings it appeared. The 0-pointer. It was impossibly, biblically huge. It towered over the tallest buildings in the battle center, a colossus of dark green metal and malevolent red optics. Its every movement was a small earthquake. The sheer scale of it was an act of psychological warfare. President Mick's voice echoed in his head. Your best bet is to run away. Everyone did. A stampede of terrified teenagers flooded the streets, sprinting for the exit. It was the smart thing to do. The logical thing. Izuku turned to run with them, his survival instincts screaming. But then he heard a small cry of pain. He whipped his head around. Lying on the ground, Her leg trapped under a pile of heavy rubble from the zero-pointer's entrance, was the girl with the gravity quirk. The girl he'd saved earlier. Ochako Uraraka. She was trying to push the concrete off her, but it was too heavy. And the zero-pointer was turning towards her, its single, massive red eye locking onto her as the nearest, easiest target. The world went silent. It was the rooftop all over again. The cat and the truck. An innocent in the path of an unstoppable force. His legs started moving before he could think, carrying him not away from the danger, but directly toward it. Kaken would blast his way through. All Might would punch it into scrap. What can I do? He had no physical power. His punches were those of a skinny, moderately fit teenager. They wouldn't scratch the paint. He reached Uraraka's side. Are you okay? My ankle. I'm stuck, she said, her voice strained with pain and panic. The zero-pointer raised its gigantic arm, a limb the size of a city bus, preparing to bring it crashing down. There was no choice. There was only one thing he could do. This was the final exam. Not for Yue. For him. For source code. Forget subtle. Forget low cost. This is a life or death edit. Pay the price. He stood up, planting his feet, and faced the mechanical god. He closed his eyes and threw the full, desperate, heroic force of his will at the Titan. Show me your code, reality shattered. This wasn't the localized, flickering code he'd been using. This was a data stream apocalypse. The entire world desaturated into a stark, black and white wireframe. The air hummed with a sound so low it was felt more than heard. The text that flooded his vision wasn't just scrolling. It was a torrential, roaring waterfall of information, threatening to drown him. The zero-pointer source code was a nightmare, a continent of programming more complex than anything he had ever seen, dwarfing even the memory of the truck. It was layers upon layers of hydraulic systems, power conduits, AI targeting protocols, and structural mechanics, all intertwined. Giga_robot_entity, ID, zero-pointer_B, status active, primary_target, entity_human_73 Uraraka, power_core_output, 98.7%, AI_protocol, arena_obstacle_V2.1. The pain was immediate and blinding. It was the cloud, the plate, and the truck all rolled into one, a supernova of agony exploding in his cranium. Blood didn't just trickle from his nose, it poured. His vision swam with system_warning, neural_overload_critical, messages flashing in angry red. He couldn't delete it. The paradox would probably kill him, maybe even unravel this entire battle center. He couldn't stop its arm. The inertia was too great, a physical law he couldn't afford to break. He needed to find a critical system. A linchpin. His mental cursor, guided by pure, frantic instinct, dove through firewalls and subroutines. He ignored the targeting systems, the armor plating, the primary power core. He needed a mobility kill. He found it. The primary hydraulic and power distribution network for the right leg, the one it was currently planting its weight on to support the arm smash. It was a complex system, but at its heart was a single, master control file. It was protected, encrypted, firewalled. But Izuku wasn't hacking from the outside. He was already inside the source code of reality itself. He had root access. He ignored the mounting pain, the feeling of his own neurons sizzling. He focused his entire being, every memory of wanting to be a hero, every ounce of his will, into writing a single, brutal, elegant line of code. He wasn't just changing a value, he was injecting a malicious command. A virus of pure will. He jammed it right into the core of the leg's control system. Execute_command, system_failure.exe/target, leg_right/type, catastrophic/override_safeties. True. The moment he hit enter in his mind, the universe buckled. The zero-pointer froze. Its arm, poised to strike, hung in the air. For a single, silent second, the behemoth was completely still. Then, its right leg began to twitch. Not a smooth motion, but a violent, spastic seizure. Blue electrical energy, raw and untamed, arced from its joints. The sound of grinding, protesting metal filled the air, a shriek of a machine tearing itself apart from the inside. With a final, deafening groan of shearing steel, the hydraulic systems in its leg blew out. The support gave way completely. The massive robot, its balance utterly compromised, didn't just fall. It toppled, twisting as it went, its center of gravity shifting away from Uraraka. Its arm, instead of smashing down on her, crashed into a neighboring building, pulverizing it in a cloud of dust and debris. The rest of its body followed, the colossus collapsing in a slow-motion avalanche of metal, away from them. The immediate threat was gone. The backlash hit Izuku like a physical punch from All Might himself. The code vanished. The world didn't just return to color. It dissolved into a screaming vortex of visual static, like a television tuned to a dead channel. The roar in his ears was absolute. The pain in his head wasn't pain anymore. It was a total system shutdown. His last coherent thought was of the girl, Uraraka, safe. His last sensation was the feeling of his own body giving out, his legs turning to water. He collapsed, his consciousness fraying into nothing. As his vision tunneled into darkness, a distant, tinny voice, distorted by static, cut through the noise. And that's it. Time's up. The last thing Izuku Midoriya saw was the dust settling around the fallen giant he had slain, not with a fist, but with a command line. Then nothing. The first thing Izuku Midoriya perceived was not light, or sound, or touch. It was static. A low, persistent hum in the very architecture of his consciousness, like a radio tuned to the space between stations. It was the ghost of the data stream, the lingering echo of the waterfall of code he had drowned in. His brain felt like a defragmented hard drive, its files scattered and slow to respond. He groaned, the sound a dry rasp in his throat. A gentle, wrinkled hand immediately rested on his forehead. Ah, you're awake. Don't try to move too quickly, dearie. You gave us all quite a scare. The voice was kind and familiar. He forced his eyes open, wincing as the bright, sterile white of the infirmary ceiling assaulted them. He was in the UE nurse's office. Recovery girl, the youthful heroine, peered down at him, her brow furrowed with professional concern. What? He croaked, his throat feeling like sandpaper. What happened is that you collapsed from extreme Quirk exhaustion, she said, her tone gentle but firm. One of the most severe cases I've ever seen, in fact. You were completely unresponsive for nearly 2 hours. She held a small cup of water with a straw to his lips, and he drank greedily. Normally, a little kiss would have you right as rain, but my quirk works by amplifying a person's own healing factor. It uses their stamina as fuel. The problem, young man, is that you don't have a scratch on you. Izuku blinked, trying to process her words through the mental fog. He pushed himself up into a sitting position, his muscles aching with a profound weariness. He was right. Aside from a phantom throb behind his eyes and the feeling of having run 3 consecutive marathons, there were no injuries. No broken bones, no lacerations. The torrent of blood from his nose had been cleaned away. My quirk can't fix what isn't broken. Recovery girl continued, her gaze sharp and analytical. Your physical body is exhausted, yes, but the real issue seems to be neurological. It's as if your entire central nervous system was subjected to a massive, simultaneous overload. Like a lightning strike directly to the brain, but without any of the burn damage. Frankly, it's baffling. A data hangover, Izuku thought, the term floating up from the static. That's what this was. He'd redlined his own internal CPU, and now he was dealing with the consequences. He had pushed source code far beyond any limit he had previously tested, and the cost was a near-total system crash. Did I? He started, his voice barely a whisper. The exam. Did I pass? The question was laced with a desperate, gut-wrenching fear. What if it was all for nothing? What if he had sacrificed a piece of his own mind only to fail? Recovery girl gave him a small, enigmatic smile. The results are for UA's administration to deliver, not a nosy old woman like me. But I will say this, she added, patting his hand. You caused quite a stir. Now you're physically cleared, but I want you to go home and rest. No strenuous activity, and absolutely no more quirk usage for at least 48 hours, you hear me? Your brain needs to recover. He nodded, the motion making his head swim. The static was receding, but a deep, resonant exhaustion remained. He had touched the face of God and been found wanting. The thought was as humbling as it was terrifying. The train ride home was a blur. Izuku stared out the window, watching the city scroll by, but his mind was elsewhere. He was replaying the final moments of the exam, the feeling of the code, the sheer scale of the zero-pointer, the exquisite agony of the backlash. He had done it. He had faced an impossible obstacle and overcome it, not with borrowed power, but with his own. But had it been enough? He arrived home to a frantic Inko Midoriya, who hugged him so tightly he thought his ribs might crack. She had received a call from Yue and had been beside herself with worry. He reassured her with a tired smile, attributing his collapse to simple exhaustion and the stress of the day. It was a lie of omission, the first of many he knew he would have to tell. The gap between her world and his was becoming a chasm. Days passed in an agony of waiting. The data hangover slowly faded, leaving him feeling raw and exposed. He avoided using source code, even for the smallest things, heeding Recovery Girl's warning. He felt strangely blind without it, cut off from the secret layer of reality he was now accustomed to perceiving. He was just Izuku again, and it was an uncomfortable, ill-fitting suit. Then, the letter came. It was in a plain white envelope, but the seal on the back was a wax stamp of the UA logo. It felt heavier than it should, weighted with the entirety of his future. He carried it to his room, his mother hovering anxiously in the doorway, her hands clasped to her chest. His fingers trembled as he tore it open. A small metal disc fell onto his desk. It lit up, and a holographic projection flickered into existence. It was All Might, but not in his hero form. It was the skeletal, fragile man from the rooftop, standing before a screen. "I am here, as a projection!" The hero's voice boomed, though it lacked its usual force. Izuku flinched. He hadn't expected to see him. "Not like this, young Midoriya," All Might began, his tone shifting to something more serious. "I know it's been a while. I'm sure you have many questions. But first, your results." Izuku held his breath, his knuckles white where he gripped the edge of his desk. "The written exam was, as expected from someone as diligent as you, flawless. Acing it is no small feat, however. The practical exam, that is where things get complicated." The screen behind All Might lit up with a scoreboard. Izuku's name was at the bottom. Izuku Midoriya, Villain Points 0. The number was a punch to the gut. 0. All that effort, all that pain, all the risk, for nothing. The fragile hope that had sustained him for the past few days shattered, and the familiar, cold despair began to seep back in. He had failed. He had been a fool to think his strange, subtle methods would ever be recognized. "A disappointing result, isn't it?" All Might said, his voice soft, as if he could see the devastation on Izuku's face. "You took down not a single villain. On the surface, you failed the practical exam entirely." Izuku's eyes burned with unshed tears. He had been so sure. "But—" All Might's voice suddenly boomed, and he gestured to another screen. "That was not the only factor. How could a hero school reject someone who embodies the very spirit of heroism? How could we turn away someone who understands that saving others is the true measure of a hero?" The second screen flickered to life. It showed a different tally. It was a recording from the exam, a bird's-eye view of him tackling Uraraka out of the path of a rubber bullet. A clip of his voice, distorted, shouting a warning about the collapsing wall. A zoomed-in shot of the reinforced concrete slab hitting the ground, remaining intact instead of exploding. And finally, a dramatic, shaky camera view of him standing alone before the zero-pointer, and the colossal machine seizing and collapsing away from the trapped girl. "We at UA value those who risk themselves for others. It's the unwritten rule of the exam, the true test. And for that we award rescue points." The score next to his name began to climb. 10. 25. 45. It didn't stop. It kept going, the numbers a blur, finally settling on a value that made Izuku's jaw drop. "Izuku Midoriya, rescue points 75. Your actions resulted in the direct and indirect saving of multiple fellow examinees." All Might explained, a proud smile on his skeletal face. "And your final act, in disabling the zero-pointer to save young Uraraka, was one of the most heroic things our judges have seen in years. You earned the highest rescue score in the history of the entrance exam." The screen changed again, showing the final leaderboard. His name was at the very top. Number 1. Above Katsuki Bakugo. So yes, young Midoriya. All Might concluded, his gaze seeming to pierce right through the hologram into Izuku's soul. You have passed. Welcome. This is your Hero Academia. The projection faded. Izuku stared at the empty space where it had been, his mind reeling. He had done it. He was in. He was number 1. A sob, raw and choked with a torrent of pent-up emotion, finally escaped him. He wasn't crying from sadness or despair, but from a profound, earth-shattering relief. His mother rushed in, saw the score, and joined him, her own tears flowing freely. He hadn't just gotten in. His entire philosophy, his strategy of using his power to save rather than destroy, had been validated at the highest level. Later that evening, after the emotional storm had passed, Izuku sat at his computer. The euphoria was still bubbling inside him, but a new, more pragmatic anxiety was taking its place. He was filling out the official UA student registration forms. Name, address, emergency contact, and then the two fields that made his blood run cold. Quirk name, underscore 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 Quirk description underscore 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 underscore. The cursor blinked mockingly. How could he possibly describe his power? Quirk name, source code. Description: the ability to perceive and rewrite the fundamental programming of reality. He imagined the reaction. He wouldn't just be flagged. He'd be whisked away to a black site. Scientists would study him, dissect him, terrified of the boy who could theoretically edit the Prime Minister out of existence. His life would be over before it began. No. He needed a lie. A good one. A half-truth that could account for the bizarre, disparate things he'd done in the exam. He reviewed his actions. He'd moved fast. He'd identified weak points. He'd reinforced an object. He'd caused a catastrophic system failure in a robot. What was the common thread? Information. Perception. Analysis. The word clicked in his head. It was perfect. It was unassuming, academic, and fit his well-established personality as a meticulous note-taker. He typed it in. Quirk name, analysis. Now for the hard part. The description. It had to be vague enough to cover a wide range of potential applications, but specific enough to sound plausible. It had to explain how he could be both fast and strong, both a spotter and a saboteur. He thought about the code. He saw weaknesses. Structural underscore integrity equals 0.2. Patrol underscore path, P7. These were systemic flaws. He hadn't punched the robot. He'd exploited its system. He began to type, choosing his words with the care of a bomb disposal expert. Quirk description allows the user to perceive and mentally deconstruct complex systems, be they physical, mechanical, or informational. This deep analysis reveals structural weaknesses, systemic flaws, and points of failure. With intense focus, the user can then interact with these identified points to exploit them, causing effects such as targeted structural collapse, system malfunctions, or enhancing an object's or his own body's performance by optimizing its inherent properties. It was a masterpiece of corporate speak and obfuscation. It explained everything and nothing. It sounded powerful but not reality-breaking. Exploiting was the key. It was a wonderfully vague verb. It could mean anything from pointing out a weak spot to causing a leg to tear itself apart. It was a lie, but it was wrapped in the comforting blanket of the truth. He clicked. Submit. A wave of cold dread washed over him, immediately followed by a sense of grim resolve. The burden was now official. His life at UA would be a performance, a constant tightrope walk over a chasm of secrets. The first day at UA felt like a dream. The sheer size of the building, the energy of the students, the legacy contained within its walls. It was everything he had fantasized about. He found his classroom, 1A, the door comically oversized. He hesitated, his heart pounding, before sliding it open. He was immediately confronted by the stern, bespectacled face of the boy with engines in his calves. "Do not put your feet on the desk," the boy was chastising Bakugo, who had his boots propped up with arrogant nonchalance. The boy then turned and saw him. "You! I am Tenya Ida, from Semi-Private Academy. I am Midoriya." "It's nice to meet you, Ida," Izuku stammered. A cheerful voice cut in. "Oh, it's you! The plain-looking boy." Izuku turned to see the bubbly, round-faced girl from the exam, Uraraka. "You were amazing! That final takedown of the zero-pointer was incredible, and you tackled me out of the way, and shouted that warning. You saved me like 3 times. How'd you do it?" Before he could answer, another voice, one he knew all too well, cut through the air like a knife. "Deku?" Bakugo was on his feet, his initial confrontation with Ida forgotten. His red eyes were narrowed into slits, filled with a mixture of pure, undiluted rage and genuine confusion. "What the hell are you doing here? This is UA. They don't let quirkless, useless pebbles in." He stalked towards Izuku, his palms already starting to smoke. "You lied to me. All this time. Where the hell did you get a quirk, you damn nerd? If you're here to make friends, then you can pack up and leave." The voice was low, tired, and utterly devoid of emotion. Everyone turned. A man who looked like he hadn't slept in a decade was lying on the floor by the door, zipped up in a yellow sleeping bag like a giant, grumpy caterpillar. He unzipped himself and rose, his black hair a tangled mess and his eyes bloodshot. "It took you all 8 seconds to quiet down. That's not going to work," he said, his tired gaze sweeping over the class. "I'm your homeroom teacher, Shota Aizawa." He pulled a gym uniform from his sleeping bag. "Put these on. Immediately. Then meet me on the field." The quirk apprehension test. Izuku felt a familiar knot of anxiety tighten in his stomach. Aizawa. An underground hero, Eraserhead. His quirk, Erasure, was completely useless against source code, which had no biological markers to erase. But Aizawa himself, his reputation for being hyper-observant and ruthless was legendary. This was his first real test. Could he maintain the lie under the gaze of a master analyst? On the field, Aizawa explained the test and the stakes. Last place would be expelled. The class erupted in protest. "Natural disasters, massive villain attacks, unforeseen calamities," Aizawa droned, silencing them. "The world is full of unfairness. It's a hero's job to fight it. If you're not prepared to go plus ultra from day one, you can leave." Izuku's resolve hardened. He had to perform. But he had to do it within the confines of his lie. Good, but not godlike. Plausible, not paradoxical. The first test was the 50-meter dash. He was paired with Ida. Ida crouched, the engines in his calves roaring to life. Izuku took his position, closing his eyes for a fraction of a second. The world flickered. Monochrome. Code. He focused on the space directly in front of him, a column of air 5'10" high and 2 feet wide. Object_atmosphere. Composition: N2 78%, O2 21%, AR 0.9%. Property: Fluid_dynamics. Drag_coefficient 1.05. He couldn't delete the air. But he could streamline it. He pushed his will into the drag_coefficient value, forcing it down. Drag_coefficient 0.2. It was a minor, temporary edit. The cost was a faint throb, like a distant bass drum. The starting pistol fired. Ida shot forward with a burst of mechanical power. Izuku ran, his body moving with its own natural, practiced speed. But it felt different. It felt effortless. The air didn't fight him, it seemed to part for him, flowing around his body in a perfect, frictionless sheath. He crossed the line in 4.13 seconds. Good. Very good. But Ida had clocked in at 3.04. Perfect. It was fast, impressive even, but not impossibly so. It looked like he was just a naturally gifted runner. Aizawa stared at the timer, then at Izuku. No visible quirk activation. No propulsion, no telltale shimmer of energy. He just ran. Aizawa's eyes narrowed slightly. He said nothing. Next, the grip strength test. This was harder. He couldn't edit the machine. He had to edit himself. This was a line he'd only crossed once in practice, and it had been unsettling. He took the dynamometer in his hand, feeling the cold plastic. He took a breath and looked inward. The code of his own body was a terrifying, beautiful, chaotic mess. A sea of biological data. He felt like a god peering at his own flawed creation. He pushed past the dizzying complexity and focused on the muscle and bone fibers of his right hand and forearm. Biological_system, ID, Midoriya_Izuku, subsystem, musculoskeletal_right_arm, property, molecular_bond_strength, 1.0. He couldn't hold this change. The risk of a biological paradox, a self-inflicted bug, was too high. It had to be a pulse. A single, violent spike. He squeezed the device and, for a single nanosecond, shoved all the will he could muster into that value. Molecular_bond_strength, 5.0. A sharp, searing pain shot up his arm, like hitting his funny bone with a sledgehammer. A biofeedback error. His own system was fighting the unauthorized edit. He grunted, his knuckles turning white. The device beeped. 110 kilograms. He let go, his hand trembling, the pain already subsiding. It was a high score, well above average for a boy his size, but again, not in the same league as the raw powerhouses like Shoji or Sato. Aizawa looked at the score, then back at Izuku's seemingly normal arm. First, unexplainable speed. Now, a burst of localized super strength. The applications were wildly inconsistent. He made a mental note. Midoriya Izuku. Quirk analysis. Incongruous results. The test continued. Standing long jump, a small, temporary edit to the gravity_influence on his body for a split second at the apex of his jump, side-to-side steps, a series of micro-edits to the friction_coefficient of his shoes. Each time, he produced a result that was impressive but not reality-defying. Each time, he felt Aizawa's gaze on him, a palpable weight of scrutiny. Then came the final, most iconic test. The ball throw. He watched as Uraraka, with a cheerful cry, got an infinity symbol. He watched Bakugo launch his ball with a furious explosion, screaming, "Die!" Then it was his turn. He stepped into the circle, the soft ball feeling heavy in his hand. This was the moment. This was the test that had defined him in the canon he knew, the moment he'd first used one for all. But he had no OFA here. He only had his secret, terrible power. He couldn't throw it to infinity. The cost of negating gravity on an object for that long, at that velocity, would likely cause another collapse. He had to replicate a powerful throw using finesse. This would be his most complex, multi-stage edit of the day. He took his stance, mirroring what he'd seen of baseball pitchers. The initial velocity would have to come from his own body. He threw the ball with every ounce of his physical strength. It was a decent throw, but nothing special. The moment it left his fingertips, his work began. The world went monochrome. The ball was a single, glowing object against the wireframe sky. Step 1: negate drag. His will slammed into the ball's code. Set property, object_softball, air_resistance_coefficient, 0.0. The strain was immediate, a sharp pain in his temples. The ball, freed from air resistance, maintained its velocity perfectly instead of slowing. Step 2: meddle with gravity. He couldn't turn gravity off. Too obvious. Too costly. But he could soften it. He found the line gravity_influence, 1.0, and began to force it down. 0.9, 0.8, 0.7. The ball's arc, which should have been a clean parabola, flattened out, stretching impossibly long. Step 3: maintain the edit. This was the hardest part. He had to hold these two altered states. It felt like holding two massive weights in his mind. His vision shimmered. The dull ache in his head was becoming a roar. He felt the telltale warmth of blood beginning to well in his nostrils. A single, crimson drop escaped and ran down his lip. He wiped it away with a convulsive jerk of his other hand, hoping no one saw. The ball reached the apex of its unnatural flight. It was hundreds of meters away now. Step 4, the cleanup. He couldn't let it land like this. The physics were wrong. Aizawa would know. Before the ball began its final descent, he executed a final, desperate command in his mind. Revert _all properties, object softball, default physics. The connection snapped. The pain in his head receded to a manageable throb. Far out on the field, the softball, suddenly subject to the full force of reality once more, dropped out of the sky with a much more natural, steep trajectory, landing with a soft thud in the distant grass. Aizawa stared at the device in his hand. 705.3 meters, the class gasped. It was almost identical to Bakugo's score. Bakugo himself looked apoplectic, his jaw hanging open in disbelief. How could Deku do that? Izuku stumbled out of the circle, his legs shaky, a coppery taste in his mouth. He had done it. But the look on Aizawa's face told him he hadn't gotten away with it. The teacher wasn't looking at the score. He was looking at the ball's trajectory, replaying it in his mind. It hadn't been a simple throw. The arc was wrong. It had been too flat for too long, as if it were a guided missile that had suddenly run out of fuel. The test concluded. Izuku had placed solidly in the middle of the pack, 9th. Safe. Not expelled. But he had drawn the one kind of attention he had desperately wanted to avoid. As the other students chattered with relief, Aizawa's voice cut through. Midoriya. Izuku froze. A word. The other students gave them a wide berth. Aizawa walked up to him, his expression unreadable, his tired eyes holding an unnerving intensity. He held up his phone, displaying Izuku's registration info. Analysis. Aizawa read aloud, his voice flat. The ability to perceive and exploit systemic weaknesses. He looked up from the phone, his gaze pinning Izuku to the spot. Today, your analysis gave you enhanced running speed with no visible propulsion. It gave you a burst of localized strength far beyond your physical build, and it allowed you to alter the fundamental ballistic properties of a thrown object mid-flight. Explain how these wildly different results fall under that single, neat description. Izuku's mouth went dry. The lie was being called. He stammered, his mind racing. For the run. I analyzed the systemic weakness of my own form and the air resistance, and optimized my path. For the grip, I analyzed my body's limits and briefly pushed past them. And the ball. I analyzed its trajectory and the atmospheric conditions to find the perfect launch angle to exploit them. It was weak. It was pathetic. And they both knew it. Aizawa was silent for a long moment. He stared at Izuku, and for the first time, Izuku felt like someone was seeing past the stammering boy, past the flimsy Quirk description, and glimpsing the terrifying, complex secret hidden beneath. I don't like mysteries, Midoriya, Aizawa said finally, his voice dangerously quiet. And I don't like liars. You have a great deal of potential, more, perhaps, than anyone else here. That's the only reason you're not being expelled right now, not for your score, but for that blatant dishonesty. He took a step closer, his scarf seeming to writhe in the air around him. But understand this. I will be watching every single move you make. I will be deconstructing every application of your quirk. I will figure out what it is you're hiding. And if I ever find that your secret puts my other students at risk, you'll be gone. Do you understand? Why yes, sensei, Izuku whispered, his whole body trembling. Good. Now get back to class. Aizawa turned and walked away, leaving Izuku standing alone in the middle of the field. He had done it. He had survived his first day. He had been accepted into his dream school, into his dream class. But as he looked at the backs of his new classmates, laughing and talking as they headed inside, he had never felt more alone. He was an island, separated from them by an ocean of secrets. And floating in that ocean was a shark named Aizawa, circling, waiting for a single drop of blood in the water. The burden of his vague description was real, and it was heavier than any robot. The week following the Quirk apprehension test was a tense exercise in calculated mediocrity for Izuku Midoriya. Under the constant, unnerving scrutiny of Shota Aizawa, he learned to walk a razor's edge. In their foundational heroics classes he held back. When sparring, he relied on the read-only function of source code, predicting his opponent's moves a fraction of a second before they were made, allowing him to dodge and weave with an almost supernatural grace. But he never edited their quirks or the environment. His movements were fluid and defensive, earning him praise for his analytical mind and quick reflexes, all perfectly in line with his fabricated quirk analysis. He let himself get hit. He made sure to lose sparring matches, especially against powerhouse students like Bakugo or Todoroki. He learned to project an aura of a clever, but physically limited, student who was still figuring out the applications of his tricky, non-combative quirk. It was a humiliating and deeply frustrating performance. Every instinct screamed at him to do more, to show them what he was capable of, but Aizawa's threat echoed in his mind. I will figure out what it is you're hiding. The risk was too great. This self-imposed limitation had an unexpected side effect. It isolated him. While his classmates saw the boy who had heroically disabled the zero-pointer, they also saw the boy who seemed oddly passive in training. He was friendly enough. His conversations with the earnest Ida and the cheerful Uraraka were highlights of his day, but there was a wall around him. A polite, nervous barrier they couldn't quite penetrate. They couldn't understand the constant, humming exhaustion behind his eyes, the low-level data hangover that was now his permanent state of being as he subtly scanned his environment, always on guard. The trip to the unforeseen simulation joint, or USJ, was supposed to be a reprieve. A chance to learn about rescue operations from the legendary space hero, 13. Izuku sat on the bus, his notebook open on his lap. A new, clean one for a new, clean start. He was genuinely excited, the old hero fanboy part of him bubbling to the surface. For a few precious moments, he could almost forget the crushing weight of his secret. The USJ itself was breathtaking. A colossal dome containing perfect facsimiles of a dozen different disaster scenarios. A landslide zone, a fire zone, a hurricane-force wind and rain zone, a sprawling city ruin. It was a hero's playground and a civilian's worst nightmare, all rolled into one. 13, their suit bulky and androgynous, began their speech. They spoke of their own quirk, Black Hole, a power designed for rescue that could so easily kill. They spoke of responsibility, of the danger inherent in their world. Izuku listened, captivated, the words resonating deep within him. His own power was the ultimate expression of that duality. A quirk that could fix a broken teacup or shatter the laws of physics. A quirk that could save a life or, with one misplaced command, create a paradox that could unravel everything. So, 13 concluded. Before we begin, I have just one question for all of you. The lights in the facility flickered and died. The fountain in the central plaza, a key feature of the USJ, sputtered and went still. A cold, unnatural silence fell over the massive dome. Then, at the base of the fountain, the air began to warp. A pinprick of blackness expanded, swirling like corrupted data, coalescing into a roiling, purple-black vortex. A portal, a hand pale and covered in a disquieting number of other, severed hands, emerged first. It was followed by a lanky figure with shaggy, light blue hair, his posture a disturbing combination of lazy and coiled with manic energy. Then more came. A flood of them, dozens upon dozens of villains, miscreants, and monsters, pouring out of the warp gate like cockroaches from a drain pipe. Stay together and don't move! Aizawa barked, his voice instantly sharp, pulling the goggles over his eyes. His capture weapon, the scarf around his neck, began to float and writhe. 13, protect the students! What the hell? Kirishima said, his voice a mixture of awe and terror. Are these part of the simulation? Don't be an idiot! Bakugo snarled, his hands already sparking. They're real. Aizawa's gaze was fixed on the leaders. The man covered in hands, the swirling mist creature, and something else. A hulking, monstrous figure standing beside them. It was massive, its exposed brain and beak-like mouth a grotesque parody of a bird. It was utterly still, its vacant eyes staring into nothing. Kurojiri. The handman, Tamura Shigaraki, said in a scratchy, irritated voice. Separate them. Scatter them. And kill them. Before anyone could react, the misty villain, Kurojiri, expanded. A dome of purple-black fog erupted, engulfing the entire class. Izuku felt a horrifying sensation of displacement, of his very atoms being pulled apart and reassembled. The world dissolved into a chaotic swirl of purple and black. He reached out, his fingers brushing against something soft, before he was violently thrown out of the vortex. He landed with a splash in cold water. He surfaced, sputtering, his UE gym uniform already soaked and heavy. He wasn't in the entrance plaza anymore. He was in the shipwreck zone, a massive pool with a large boat in the center. The water around him was teeming with villains, their quirks creating small whirlpools or giving them amphibious features. Ribbit? Izuku whipped his head around. Tsuyu Azuri, the frog-like girl from his class, was treading water beside him. A few feet away, Minoru Mineta was screaming, his purple ball-like hair bobbing on the surface. Midoriya! Azuri! We're going to die! Mineta shrieked, tears and snot mixing with the water on his face. Calm down, Mineta, Azuri said, her voice unnervingly steady. We need to assess the situation. The villains don't seem to know what our quirks are. That's an advantage. Izuku's mind was already racing, pushing past the initial shock. He activated source code, the world flickering into its familiar, coded monochrome. The water, the boat, the villains, all of it resolved into lines of data. He saw the villains' entity_data, their quirks listed as simple properties. One had quirk, sharkskin, another quirk, water_whips. They were small-time thugs, but dangerous in this environment, and they were closing in. They're going to try and capsize the boat with us in the water, Izuku realized, seeing their coordinated movements. We need to get on board, now! They swam frantically for the large pleasure craft. Villains swiped at them, one with elongated, fin-like arms, another firing pressurized jets of water. Izuku, without thinking, made a small, instinctive edit. He focused on the water directly in front of Azuri and Mineta, momentarily increasing its surface_tension to the consistency of thick syrup. A water jet that would have hit Mineta dead-on splattered against the modified patch of water, as if hitting a wall. It was a tiny change, almost unnoticeable in the chaos. The cost was a brief, sharp pang in his temple. They scrambled aboard the boat, dripping and exhausted. The villains began to circle, their grins predatory. You're just kids, one of them sneered. This'll be easy, listen, Izuku said, his voice low and urgent. Mineta, your quirk, it's super sticky, right? What happens when you pull them off? They just bounce. They're not sticky to me. Mineta blubbered. Azuri, you have your tongue, you're jumping, you're sticking to walls, you're amazing in and out of the water. Izuku continued, his analytical brain taking over. This was what he was good at, not fighting but planning. And you, Midoriya? Azuri asked, her large, dark eyes fixed on him. Your quirk is some kind of super strength, right? Like at the test? It's more complicated than that. He hedged. It's about analysis. Finding weaknesses. He looked at the villains in the water. Then at the water itself. An idea, dangerous and brilliant, sparked in his mind. He couldn't fight them all. But he could change the battlefield. Okay, he said, a newfound confidence in his voice. I have a plan. He turned to Mineta. I need you to throw as many of your balls into the water as you can. Spread them out. Create a sticky minefield. Mineta, seeing a glimmer of hope, began plucking the purple spheres from his head and chucking them into the water with panicked energy. The villains laughed, thinking it was a pathetic, useless gesture. Izuku then turned his attention to the villains themselves. He couldn't harm them directly. The cost and the moral implications were too high. But their weapons were just objects. One villain was wielding a crude metal harpoon. Izuku focused on it. Object_weapon, ID, harpoon_crude. Material, low_grade_steel. Structural_integrity, 0.75. With a sharp pulse of will, he rewrote the value. Structural_integrity, 0.05. The harpoon, now as brittle as sugar glass, crumbled into rust-colored dust in the villain's hands. The man stared at his empty palms in stunned confusion. Izuku repeated the process on a pipe another villain was holding, which snapped in two with a dull clang. The cost was minimal. Headaches. Annoying, but manageable. He was a disarming ghost. Now for the main event. He looked at the vast expanse of water where the villains were swimming, now dotted with Mineta's floating purple balls. He took a deep, shuddering breath. This was going to be a big one. Not as big as the zero-pointer, but close. He focused not on a single object, but on the entire body of water within the shipwreck zone. The code was immense, a flowing sea of data. He ignored the temperature, the pressure. He found what he was looking for, the viscosity and surface_tension properties. He channeled his will, picturing a swirling vortex. He wasn't trying to create a solid. He was trying to create chaos. He slammed a complex, multivariable command into the water's core programming. Execute_script, create_vortex, center_point, shipwreck_boat.x, shipwreck_boat.y, radius 50m, vortex_strength, 8.5, pull_direction, center_down. The backlash felt like a hammer blow to the back of his skull. The world flickered violently, and a warm stream of blood dripped from his nose. He staggered, gripping the boat's railing to stay upright. But it worked. The water around the ship began to churn. A slow, inexorable whirlpool formed, pulling everything towards the center. The villains, caught completely by surprise, were dragged into the swirling vortex. They flailed, trying to swim against the current, but it was useless. They were pulled towards the center, where Mineta's super sticky balls were now clustered together in a giant, inescapable trap. One by one, the villains were sucked in, getting stuck to the purple spheres and to each other, forming a helpless, struggling mass of flailing limbs. Wow, ribbit, Azuri said, her eyes wide. What was that? Just analyze the water currents, and use the ship's displacement to create a small vortex. Izuku panted, wiping the blood from his face. It was another plausible, technical-sounding lie. With the immediate threat neutralized, they had a moment to breathe. They could see the central plaza now. And the sight was horrifying. Aizawa was a whirlwind of motion, a dervish of black cloth and controlled fury. He was fighting dozens of villains at once, his erasure quirk flickering from one to the next, his capture weapon lashing out like a striking snake. He was incredible. A true pro. But he was only one man, and he was tiring. Then the monster moved. The hulking, bird-like creature with the exposed brain. It moved with a speed that defied its bulk, intercepting Aizawa midair. The impact was sickening. The sound of snapping bone echoed across the water. Aizawa cried out, a sound of pure agony. The creature, the Nomu, grabbed Aizawa's head and slammed it into the concrete ground. Again. And again. Sensei! Izuku screamed, his voice raw with horror, but the worst was yet to come. Shigaraki, the handman, slowly approached the downed, broken form of their teacher. He reached out, his 5 fingers aiming for Aizawa's face. His quirk, decay. One touch would be the end. At that exact moment, the doors to the USJ were blasted open. All Might stood there, his smile gone, replaced by a mask of cold fury. I am here. The battle that followed was the stuff of legends and nightmares. All Might moved like a thunderclap, dispatching the remaining low-level villains in a blur. But when he faced the Nomu, something was wrong. His punches, each one capable of changing the weather, landed with a dull, wet thud. They had no effect. The Nomu didn't even flinch. It's no use! Shigaraki cackled, scratching his neck with a frantic energy. My Nomu was created specifically to kill you! He has shock absorption. Izuku, Azuri, and Mineta watched from the boat, frozen in horror. They saw Bakugo, Kirishima, and Todoroki join the fray, trying to help, but even their powerful quirks were useless. Todoroki froze the Nomu, but it simply broke free, regenerating the limbs it lost. Bakugo pinned its head, but its body still moved, its shock absorption nullifying the force of his explosions. All Might was being pushed back. The symbol of peace was bleeding. The smile was gone, replaced by a grimace of pain and effort. A wisp of steam rose from his body. Izuku knew. The time limit. All Might was running out of time. He's going to lose. All Might is going to die. Aizawa-sensei is going to die. My friends are going to die. The thought was an icy spear in his gut. He looked at the Nomu, his vision already shifting, the code of the world overlaying the horrific scene. He didn't even have to try. His desperation was the catalyst. He saw the Noma's code. And it was the most horrifying thing he had ever witnessed. It wasn't clean or elegant. It was a chaotic, stitched-together monstrosity. A dozen different Quirk factors, mangled and forcibly fused, their codes screaming in silent conflict. He saw the hyper_regeneration script running on a constant loop. And he saw the primary defensive protocol, the one that was killing All Might. Active_Quirk_defense. ID, shock_absorption. Function, nullify_kinetic_energy input. Efficiency, 1.0/100%. Limit null. There was no limit. It could absorb anything. It was a perfect defense. Izuku's blood ran cold. He couldn't delete the Nomu. He'd learned his lesson about large-scale deletions. The paradox would be catastrophic. He couldn't edit the hyper_regeneration. It was too deeply embedded, a core function. But the shock absorption, it was an active defense protocol. A shield. Not a part of its base being. Can I turn it off? The thought was insane. It was orders of magnitude more complex and dangerous than disabling the zero-pointer. That was a machine. This was a living, breathing, albeit artificial, creature. The potential for a butterfly bug was immense. The cost would be astronomical. It might kill him. It might leave him a vegetable. He looked at All Might, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth, his body steaming more heavily. He saw Bakugo, Todoroki, and Kirishima standing defiant but outmatched. He heard Shigaraki's gleeful, psychopathic laughter. He remembered 13's words. A power that can so easily kill, or save. There was no choice. Not for him. Not for the boy who ran towards the sludge villain. Not for the boy who stood before the zero-pointer. Ajiri Mineta, he said, his voice quiet and strange. Get ready to swim. What are you going to do? Ajiri asked, her voice laced with dread. Izuku didn't answer. He turned to face the central plaza. He closed his eyes, shutting out the world of flesh and blood, and dived headfirst into the world of pure code. He poured every ounce of his will, every fiber of his being, into one single, desperate task. He ignored the cacophony of data from the rest of the USJ. He ignored the screams and explosions. He focused solely on the Noma. His mental cursor, a blade of pure white light, sliced through the Noma's defenses. He found the line of code. ID, shock_absorption. It was a fortress, protected by layers of conflicting, chaotic programming. He couldn't delete it. He couldn't rewrite it. The system was too unstable. A direct edit might cause the whole thing to crash in an unpredictable way, maybe even causing the Nomu to explode with the force of a bomb. He needed a workaround. A bypass. A temporary command injection that would override the primary function without deleting the code itself. He needed to tell the system that the quirk simply wasn't there, to treat it as a null value. He formulated the command in his mind. It was the most elegant, dangerous, and complex line of code he had ever written. Set property, entity_nomu.active_quirk_defense, shock_absorption, null, duration equals 5s. He was setting the property to an invalid state, a null pointer, and crucially, adding a timer. A 5-second window. That was all he could manage. Any longer, and the strain would shatter his mind. It was a kill-or-be-killed gambit. He took a final, deep breath in the real world and pushed execute. The universe screamed. It wasn't a sound. It was a feeling. A fundamental vibration in the fabric of reality. For a split second, the entire USJ flickered, the lights wavering, the very air seeming to thin. A ripple, a glitch in the matrix. The backlash was not a wave. It was an explosion. A nuke detonating inside his skull. The pain was absolute, transcending all description. It was not hot or cold, sharp or dull. It was the color of static, the sound of a dying star, the feeling of his own consciousness being torn into a million pieces. Critical error, paradox_violation, neural_integrity_compromised, system_cascade_failure_imminent. Red warnings flooded his vision, so numerous they overlapped into a solid wall of crimson. His heart hammered in his chest, then sputtered. Blood didn't just pour from his nose, it erupted from his eyes and ears, hot trails of crimson down his face. He felt a series of violent convulsions rack his body, his muscles seizing and firing at random. On the battlefield, the effect was subtle, but immediate. The Nomu, locked in a grapple with all might, flinched. Its entire body shuddered, as if struck by an invisible bolt of lightning. Its vacant eyes widened for a fraction of a second, a flicker of what might have been confusion, or even pain. Shigaraki saw it. What? All Might felt it. The spongy, impact-dampening resistance he had been fighting against vanished. For the first time, his raw, kinetic force had a solid target. He didn't waste the opportunity. He didn't question it. He acted. Go beyond! He roared, a lifetime of power erupting from him. Plus Ultra! His next punch was not absorbed. It connected. The sound was not a wet thud. It was a sonic boom. A thunderclap that shattered every remaining pane of glass in the USJ dome. The force of the blow, undiluted and absolute, lifted the Nomu off its feet. It didn't just send it flying. It launched it like a cannonball, a black streak against the sky. It smashed through the reinforced dome of the unforeseen simulation joint and vanished into the clouds, a new, man-made star. The 5 seconds were up. On the boat, Izuku's body went rigid. A final, choked gasp escaped his lips, and he collapsed, his head hitting the deck with a sickening crack. His eyes rolled back into his head, showing only the whites. The static in his mind resolved into a single, terrifying state, absolute, profound, and utter darkness. He had won the battle for All Might. But he had lost the war for his own consciousness.